Hello, everybody. In today's podcast, we are going to continue with our series in the history of Islam, and we have been discussing the period known as the Crusades. We have spoken about the First Crusade and the establishment of the Crusader states with the important establishment of the Kingdom of Jerusalem. And we also spoke about the Second and the Third Crusades and the appearance of important Muslim military leaders such as Salah ad-Din al-Ayyubi, Saladin as he is known in the West, and we saw the counterattack of the Islamic world and how they were able to prepare and effectively take back what the Crusaders had taken. And we saw that the Second and the Third Crusade ended in failure for the Christian armies. Now, the Christians did not give up, and they tried many more times. And today we will discuss the Fourth Crusade that took place between 1202 up to 1204, and we will discuss the Fifth Crusade. Now we have to say that even after the Fifth Crusade, there were small campaigns, but we cannot really count them as really big, let's say, crusades in the sense like the previous ones. Therefore, we are going just to speak briefly about the Fourth and the Fifth Crusade, which are the last important and significant ones. Now, regarding the Fourth Crusade that took place between 1202 and 1204, in comparison with the First Crusade, we have to say that the fourth one, since the beginning, presented problems of leadership and lack of manpower. As Professor Yotishki, in his book The Crusaders and the Crusader States, he says the following. The crusade began to falter in summer 1202 when it became apparent that insufficient numbers were turning up to meet the terms of the Venetian treaty. Bail Hardouin, seeking to explain the direction taken by the crusade in 1202-1203, blamed those who had taken the cross but neither set out from home or, like many of Baldwin of Flanders' forces, choose alternative routes is simply lack of communication and central organization. So the professor is telling us here that there was a lack of communication. There was no really a united Christian front, and there was no really an important figure leading the Crusaders at this time. During the First Crusade, we saw very many important, significant military Christian leaders, as many important, the Willon brothers, for example, were very key in the success of the First Crusade. But by the time of the Fourth Crusade, the Christians were not really united, and the lack of communication, central organization, therefore manpower, was a decisive factor that propitiated the failure of the Fourth Crusade. Therefore, this lack of coordination and poor leadership was crucial to lead a successful Crusader army, but since this was not the case, it was a defeat for the Christians at the hands of Muslim military leaders. Another factor that contributed to the failure of the crusade was the lack of money. Even after Baldwin, Count of Flanders, and Boniface of Montferrat and other leaders have borrowed to their limit to make up the amount they needed for the crusade, still they fell short by 34,000 marks, which was the currency at the time. This implied that there was not enough money to pay the men and keep them without revolting, to buy provisions, and other requirements to sustain the crusade throughout its course. Clearly, This was not the situation during the First Crusade of 1095, in which there was enough money after the contributions of European princes and the sack of the Jewish communities of the Rhine region. Besides, the leadership of great knights such as Bohemond of Taranto, Raymond St. Giles, Godfrey of Bouillon, and Tancred of Lys among others. In the end, the Fourth Crusade ended in failure. Now, let's talk about briefly regarding the Fifth Crusade that took place between 1217 up to 1221. And the Fifth Crusade ended also in failure, with a similar result as the previous ones. This Fifth Crusade was called by the Pope Innocent III in the year 1213, and it was preached at the Fourth Lateran Council. There were serious problems of leadership again, regarding who was really in charge, since the Pope died in the year 1216, meaning 1 year before the Crusaders actually left or embarked in their expedition. Therefore, um, before even the crusade started, there were problems with coordination and leadership. And the first contingents of crusaders arrived in the east as a trickle of national groupings rather than a series of coordinated armies. Consequently, the lack of military leadership played an important role in the coordination and successful decision-taking of the Crusaders, besides their lack of acquaintance with climate and local geography. Another decisive factor was the waste of time waiting for the reinforcements promised by Frederick II, costing them a decisive defeat in Egypt in the year 1221, reinforcements that never arrived. Now, if we compare the First Crusade, that was a successful one, with the Fifth Crusade, we have that, as Professor Jutishki states in his book Crusaders and the Crusader States, he says that the Fifth Crusade outlasted all save the first in length of time. Both crusades involved long siege followed by periods of uncertainty and recuperation, but in 1099 the final assault on Jerusalem was made possible by the timely arrival of the Italian fleet, whereas in 1221 the expected reinforcements did not arrive. The policy of attacking Egypt rather than pursuing a campaign in Syria in 1218 was ultimately a failure. Now, therefore, summarizing what we have just mentioned, the success achieved by the Crusaders in the beginning could not be replicated neither during the Fourth or the Fifth Crusade. The lack of manpower, money, and leadership contributed ultimately to its failures. So, what can we say in conclusion from all of this period that we know as the Crusades and what we have already spoken in previous podcasts regarding the first, second, third, and now we have just discussed the fourth and the fifth crusade. In conclusion, regarding all this period known as the Crusade time, we could say that after many battles and years of conflict, the Crusaders were really exhausted by the end of the Fifth Crusade and could not successfully contend the Islamic counterattack. By this time, the Muslim world had had enough time to react, prepare, and organize in a very effective way that was able to neutralize the Crusaders and destroy their states. The Crusaders' inefficient coordination and lack of resources propitiated their own defeats and ultimate failure. What had started by the calling of Pope Urban II in 1095 as a successful liberating campaign of Christian holy places had ended by the time of the Fifth Crusade in 1221, with an Islamic reaction and successful recovery after the initial defeats during the First Crusade. Although defeated and forced to retreat, the fortifications, roads, houses, and castles of Crusader rule in the Holy Land and throughout Syria and many places can still be appreciated today, an imprint that remains fresh, especially in the Muslim mind, memories of an old period when the cross and the crescent moon fought for their holiest sites. So, with this podcast, we end this chapter in history related to the period of the Crusades. And I want to invite you for future podcasts in which we will continue with more about the history uh, of Islam, the religious evolution ideas, the concepts that shaped the formation and the establishment of the religion of Islam. We will discuss and continue to talk about important personalities, great philosophers, and some of the greatest minds in the Muslim world. I want to thank you again for your attention. As always, don't forget to subscribe to check the additional material that I have in this channel if you like history, philosophy, religion, and many other topics. Thank you so much, and we'll see each other in the next podcast.